He is the co-founder of the Hindus for Human Rights. This is a uh, human rights organization that works towards protecting human rights in India and elsewhere, and promoting the education of human rights to anybody and everybody. And his presentation is about giving us an overview of what his organization does and what has been it been doing since its beginning, and what their plans are. He has a presentation that Ruth is gonna run it, and Mr. Rajgopal is gonna present and talk the charts. Okay, so go ahead, Raju.
Thank you all. Okay, let me make sure. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you all. I'm speaking from Berkeley, California, where the temperature today in the cooler parts of the Bay Area here is 97 degrees, and we don't have an air conditioner because the people in Berkeley never thought of putting air conditioners because we always enjoyed the fog's blessing of cooling us down. So, so again, a warmer hello to all of you. Thanks for inviting me to share what my organization does. And Ruth, if you can start the presentation. Since we are a small group of people, I will try to avoid making this like a business meeting, going through every slide and every item there. Uh, Let me start with who we are, because a lot of things we have talked about just now, the press freedoms, and one of you expressed the concern, are we going to be next in the US in seeing the kind of thing that is happening in the Philippines? Uh, there is a lot going on in India that we not all of us are fully aware of, and there is so much parallel between Trump's world and white nationalism here and what's going on in India. So what I'll try to do is to give you a flavor for what is happening so that you can begin to appreciate how important it is for us and how we are so connected that we too must act to preserve India's democracy. So we call it the call to action. Next one, please. Uh, Ruth, can you? Yeah. We came into existence only a year ago, but the trigger point of our coming into existence is the re-election of Prime Minister Modi for a second term. And for those of us that have been following the trajectory of the Hindu nationalist group, that was really an alarm. Multiple, whatever they call it, three-bell alarm as to what we think was going to happen next. And we wanted to be prepared to address human rights violation by the Hindu nationalists in India. And they have not disappointed us at all. Modi has done everything that we expected him to do and much more, thanks to the courtesy of our president here, Trump, who has pretty much said, I'll look the other way, do whatever you want in India. So we came into existence with the idea of defending India's multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and indeed multi-racial pluralism in India as well as the United States. And what we do that's different from, let's say, Amnesty International India is we want to bring a Hindu perspective, because in this case, it is in our names as Hindus that the Modi government is doing everything it is doing, which is in our opinion is not Hinduism at all. And I want to take a time to talk to you a little bit about how we view it differently. The next one, please. I know many of you probably have a very positive interactions with people from the Indian subcontinent, or you may have traveled there. Uh, and kind of things you hear about Hinduism whenever you talk about people like Gandhi is the whole idea of Shanti, which is peace, Nyaya, which is justice, and Manavta, which is human rights. These are right from the Hindu scriptures of old, not from Amnesty International. But you can see that we all speak the same language when it comes to human rights. Next one, please. And when we founded this organization, we said, what are we going to do that's different? We want to talk about the inclusive Hinduism, not the kind of Hindu nationalist Hinduism that we hear so much of today. We want to actively work towards rejecting the caste system, which is so prevalent, and it's showing its ugly face even in the culture here in the Silicon Valley culture, and I'll touch on it in a moment later. We want to believe in dialogue with people that disagree with us, but advocacy as our path to action. Advocacy both in Washington D.C. with our Congress, and advocacy with people in India, and amplify their voices. And uh, and these days it's become so important for us to separate ourselves from fake news, which, for those of you that have heard it over and over again from our president, I have to tell you, Mr. Modi had preceded him by several years in perfecting the art of fake news. So we want to try and share fact-based information. Our priorities, let's go to the next one. We want to provide a progressive platform for progressive Hindus, which is sadly missing. We participate in peaceful democratic movements. And as Muhammad said, when Modi and Trump were locking arms in Howdy Modi in a Houston arena, we were out there, outside, protesting along with several groups, Muslim groups and human rights groups, to bring attention to the fact there is so much common between Hindu nationalism and white nationalism. Uh, Unfortunately, these days, unlike Christian faith leaders, many of them have been speaking out. There are very few Hindu faith leaders who are speaking up about what is going on in India, and we want to amplify those few Hindu faith leaders' voices that people don't hear about. And last, we want to take an active role in educating our Congress people and senators about what's going on in India, because what has happened is a kind of a development where democratic candidates who are sworn to oppose Trump, oppose white nationalism, and doing everything they can and are visible in the media, especially the Congress people of Indian origin. Unfortunately, they don't seem to apply the same rule to what is going on in India. They've been accepting funds from Hindu nationalist groups and trying to promote democratic values in the US. And I want to touch upon that a bit. It also applies to your own Houston, where not only do you have a huge arena there, it also is an arena indirectly between Hindu nationalism and democracy. And I will touch on that. Some of the intervention that we have done, and I'll quickly go through this. India passed a citizenship law under Modi's second term, which for the first time introduces religion as a test of citizenship, which could, the way it is implemented, which could put a lot of Muslims who have lived in India for a long, long time at risk of losing their citizenship. Huge threats to press freedoms. And when I saw that documentary on Philippines, I said, well, I wish somebody would quickly prepare themselves to prepare a very similar documentary of heroes who are under arrest right now, or threat of arrest for simply criticizing the government. You heard Duarte talk about, you got free to criticize us, but we're going to throw you in jail. That is what Modi is already doing. We are participating in interfaith dialogues, which is connected to the State Department. We are supporting the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which actually has recommended to the State Department that India be placed on as a country of particular concern when it comes to religious freedoms. We are battling to make sure that the State Department accepts that recommendation, but we are very skeptical given Trump's camaraderie with Modi that it'll ever happen. But hopefully that whatever they decide will carry on to the next administration, hopefully to the Biden administration, which will be more understanding of what's happening in India. We are also, this may be of interest to you because over the last 6 months, even people, ordinary people that have protested the citizenship laws for its discriminatory acts, students, press people, activists, many of them have been arrested, interrogated under a very draconian law that is called UAPA, which is pretty much allows the government to hold anybody as a terrorist and put in prison for 6 months without bail. So we want to start a prisoners of conscience wall as part of our effort to amplify, to bring attention to what is going on in here. Next one, please. I already touched on some of the things we are doing. Times Square was used as a venue recently by Hindutva, Hindu nationalists, to celebrate their triumph over demolition of a mosque in 1992, which set the Hindu nationalist movement going. And they wanted to celebrate replacing that mosque with a temple. And a lot of us went and protested and were able to convince some of the media that were showing those huge electronic boards to scale back, giving a place for Hindutva nationalism right in Times Square. We have exposed a group in Seattle, which is calls itself an alliance for persecuted people all over the world, but in fact is a front for an RSS, a Hindu nationalist organization. We are also co-chairing the India Working Group under the International Religious Freedom, working with the United Nations and so forth. So I'm quickly going through that just to give you a flavor for all the things that we're doing. But the most important thing that I wanted to cover today is to give you a flavor for how the current movement in India, the Hindu nationalists, are pretending to talk for Hinduism and where real Hindus differ from what is being talked about today. So I call that Hindutva is not real Hinduism. And if I may, I'll take a moment to switch track at this point. And if you have any question right now, please ask me right now before I go to the second part of the presentation.
Okay,
I have
so
a question. I have a question. Why is Modi being so hard on the Muslims? He's taking away the citizenship of the Muslims over in India. Modi's doing that.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it goes back to, and I will cover that in my second presentation. The entire root of the anti-Islamophobia is not something new in India. It goes back to the root and the foundation of the organization that he comes from, which is called RSS, which is a 94-year-old organization. And I will more precisely answer your question in a moment if I could go to the second part. Are there any other questions?
hey, Raju, there were about three questions in the chat. The first one was from Luisa. Her question is your organization currently working on the Biden campaign?
Yes, the answer is yes. We have Biden campaign initially appointed a person for outreach to the Indian Muslim community who happened to be from Modi's camp. And we battled with them to change that and to bring in a Muslim Indian American to deal with Indian Muslim affairs. So they have acceded to that. And currently, we are working with some of the people inside the Biden campaign. And yesterday's announcement of the transition team kind of bodes well for us because they have brought in somebody from the Pramila Jaipal campaign, which a person who seems to understand very well what is going on in India.
Okay. The other question is from Johnny Peden. He says, have any initiatives been undertaken for the LGBTQ community in India?
I could not hear, your audio was not very clear, Mohammed.
Oh. Hey, Johnny, can you go ahead and ask that question? I don't know what's wrong with my microphone.
Yeah, that'll be good.
That's the first question.
Oh, I see.
Yes, my question was, have any initiatives been undertaken for the LGBTQ community in India?
There is a lot of effort in the lot of movements within India who've been very successful in the LGBT community. I think recently, not this particular Supreme Court, but the previous Supreme Court about 6 months ago, actually removed any effort on the part of the government to revive a law that came from the British times outlawing homosexuality. So today the LGBT community has a legal protection that they needed and they deserved. And but yet the stigma is still there. We don't know quite where the Modi government stands on the LGBT issue, although many of the senior people in his party hold out very, very homophobic views, but it hasn't yet come to the front because they've been battling a lot of other issues. But we as an organization will stand in support of LGBT rights in India as the discussions begin. And if there are rights violations of the LGBT community, we will definitely speak up.
One group I failed to mention there would be the transgender community.
Yeah.
I understand they have faced a lot of opposition and
Yeah.
threats in India. Is that true?
Yes, there have been murders of transgender people. Um, there are threats, and they have still some reservations about the bill that was passed in the parliament, which was called as a protection of transgender communities. But that entire debate has been sidelined because of all the other things that have been going on. But I think they do need some special provisions in the law to protect them. Having said that, I also have to say there are some parts of India that have been very good for the transgender community. Tamil Nadu is one example where you find transgender anchors in the TV stations, special job reservations for the transgender community in certain businesses. So there's a contrasting thing that are going on where some states are very progressive, but at the same time, the current political dispensation does not seem to be as friendly. So we'll have to see where that debate goes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it any better? Okay, Luisa has another question. It's does the Houston Hindu population respond to the significant points you're raising?
Uh, I'm afraid not, um, because I think the Houston has become an epicenter for the Hindu nationalists in the United States, and they've been organizing very well. And it is not a coincidence that Prime Minister Modi chose Houston to be the venue where they brought 50,000 people into an arena where Trump made an appearance, and it was called Howdy Modi. So we are making some inroads, but I'm afraid we are not yet being heard in the Houston area. But more importantly, the Muslim community in the Houston area is in fact hearing us, and they are faced with what I think of as a Hobson's choice in the Houston congressional race, where they have a Democratic candidate who seems to be everything that they would like in a candidate as far as their concerns here are concerned. However, he seems to be a very strong supporter of the Hindutva lobby or the Hindu nationalists who could, in Congress, potentially stop discussion of human rights in India. So who do they vote for? So they do have a huge decision to make as individual voters. I don't want to get beyond that, but we are continuing to talk to all the communities, but we're not making much progress in the Hindu community.
Okay. Okay, so let's just ask one more question and then you can go to the second section. Okay, so the next question, first it's a comment and then a question from Don Rohr. It says, it seems that our understanding of India and Hinduism is very limited in this country. How can we help besides improving our education system?
Um, yeah, I mean, there are two ways I look at it. I remember when my children went to school here in California about 15 years ago, there was little or nothing about India in their school textbooks, where they get the first impression of what other countries are. And today, my grandson in Eugene is telling me about the caste system. He's telling me about the Dalits, the so-called untouchables. So there's some progress in the education field to teach the kids a little bit more about India, but not enough. But I think today, when I look at what is happening, the parallels between the Black Lives Movement and the caste system in India have so much in common. It gives us a very good way to launch a better understanding of India, coming from both from a caste and communal perspective when we compare it to what is happening in the Black Lives Movement. So we are actively pursuing that avenue where we can, in fact, there's a fantastic book that's been written about caste by Wilkerson, Isabel Wilkerson. New York Times published an article on her book, which brings these two together. And we have to start using those types of tools to educate ourselves about the parallels between what's happening here in terms of racism and Islamophobia. And in India's case, it's caste discrimination and Islamophobia. And with that in mind, we are bringing some of the Black Lives Matter. We are bringing in our conference in a couple of weeks, Reverend Barber, to give a keynote address along with the grandson of Gandhi, Rajmohan Gandhi. They're going to together launch our conference to talk about these parallels. And these kinds of things I think are going to help as we move forward in terms of educating the American public about the importance of what's happening in India and Hinduism.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, shall I move forward? So the second part of what I wanted to cover is precisely the answer to the educational part. Ruth, can you move forward, please? One more. Yeah. What is happening today is Modi's party is trying to wear the mantle of Hinduism, which in reality is simply a political mantle that bears no resemblance to the ancient tradition that has defied all attempts to impose a single narrative upon it. So our challenge today, both in India and elsewhere, is to make a distinction for people who want to know what is the difference. Next, please. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this ideology that's called Hindutva, which is the party and the dispensation that Modi comes from, is 95 years old. It got started during India's independence movement, where there were two schools of thought, one about partitioning India along religious lines, and the other one where people thought it was a travesty to divide the country. And in that context, this group called RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, who right from the beginning were against Islam, against Christianity, and they wanted a completely Hindu state without any Christians or Muslims in it, which of course did not happen. So they had that particular grievance for 95 years, and they have been propagating that silently through many of their youth camps for a long, long time. Now, Hindutva literally simply means Hinduness. So it's a benign word at first glance, nothing wrong with it. But if you go back to what they teach in their youth camps, have taught for the 95 years, it invites hate, aggression, and violence. Fortunately, for 67 years, until 1992, various governments in India, led by Nehru, led by Indira Gandhi, so forth, had managed to contain this virus called Hindutva. But since their Congress party has lost its majority in India, Hindutva has become the predominant political dispensation. And the fact of the matter is, it shows all signs of an emerging fascism. But in India, more and more people are beginning to believe that they're one and the same. That's how successful the Hindutva campaign has been. How did that happen? Let me just quickly give you what has happened. Next slide, please. The three I's that the so-called Hindutva groups or the RSS have used in their very patient 95-year pathway to where they are today. One is the ideology, and the ideology is spread through youth camps called RSS Shakas, which were banned for a period after independence. But for a long, long time, it has been unbanned, and there are literally thousands of youth groups all over the country which practically talk about two things: that we must rewrite the history, we must fight for a pure Hindu Rashtra, and if we don't, we'll be overwhelmed by Muslims and Christians, and we have to also attack enemies within. So that's the ideology. Second is international opportunities to put their ideology to test. which has become much more uh, effective since worldwide Islamophobia. Since 9/11 and since Trump came to power, it has really opened up a lot of other channels for them to execute their Islamophobia. But the third one is what's called the IT strategy. The whole issue, the social media has been taken by this group way ahead of the Trump, way ahead of the Russian hackers to really put it to application to spread their message to Facebook and WhatsApp. And I don't know if some of you have caught articles in the last few weeks where Facebook has been accused of directly collaborating with the current Hindu fascist government in promoting its ideology rather than be even-handed. So those are the three I's that have made it reach the point where it is today. Next one, please. Now, what has happened as a result of all of these in the last 8 years, the Modi government and the BJP and the RSS. BJP is a political wing of RSS. RSS is the ideological mother house going back 95 years. They've taken over almost all the cultural and human rights institutions. They're chipping away at the Indian constitution, and the citizenship laws is one of those. The so-called citizenship law that people have been protesting, which could jeopardize the citizenship of millions of Muslims, is a direct violation of the secular constitution. However, the Indian Supreme Court does not seem willing to take it up and rule on it. There have been mob lynchings of Muslims for even rumors of eating beef or selling beef. The police and the judiciary have become almost completely compliant with the government. Press freedoms are being increasingly curbed. I was talking to the Amnesty International group in India just 2 days back, where the intimidation has reached a level where they are being attacked by every arm of the Modi government day after day. And in fact, they're reaching out to the employees of Amnesty in Delhi, threatening them that if they don't leave the organization, they could be subject to arrest. And despite those blackmails, some very courageous people are working with Amnesty in India. But I just want to, since you're all from Amnesty International, wanted to share that with you as to how dire the situation is, I think, for any human rights fighters in India. They're also using colonial era sedition laws to arrest activists and journalists. Many of them are already behind bars, as I mentioned earlier, with no chance of bail and no chance of a court hearing their case because they've all been basically compromised. Let me go to the next one. So this is where it becomes very important for people here when we talk to other people and your friends, your family, who have some familiarity with Hinduism or into yoga or have heard some Hindu gurujis over the years and have been very, very positively influenced by Hinduism and have very good vibrations about it. Today, they're probably very, very confused when people talk about, read articles about where Hindu Rashtra is heading in India. So I wanted to share with you a few things that people like me think of as Hinduism, grown up with Hinduism, versus what is today happening in the political avatar of Hinduism called Hindutva. In my view, Hinduism abounds in inclusiveness, kindness, compassion, whereas Hindutva propagates fear, insecurity, exclusiveness, and hatred. Hinduism has always welcomed other faiths and traditions. It's not an accident that India is now a home for all the major Abrahamic religions and religions like Buddhism. But Hindutva, that is Modi's group, has lived on disdain for Islam and Christianity. Hinduism, bhakti is a devotion, left no room for hate. None of our saints and savants ever talked about hating other people. But BJP's Ram Bhakti, the temple they want to build in Ayodhya, is actually being built on the dead bodies of thousands of people after they destroyed a mosque. And Modi wants to celebrate it as a triumph for Hinduism. Now, Hinduism has never had any single authority. There has been no Hindu papacy, and it always respects all pathways to God. But today, the way it is heading, it is Modi's Hindu RSS group that wants to hold the reins of all the religious aspect of Hinduism. And they've pretty much compromised, or to use a bad word, bribed, if you will, many of the Hindu leaders where very few are willing to take a position against Hindutva. As far as gender equality is concerned, Hinduism has always celebrated the equality of Shiva and Shakti, the female and male forces. And you see so many temples in India that celebrate both gods and goddesses. That is my perception of Hinduism. But Hindutva and the leaders of RSS are very, very regressive in gender rights. And in fact, the leader of RSS is on record saying the woman's place is at home and in the kitchen, even today. Next one, please. Now, you all know about ahimsa, non-violence that Gandhi is well known for. Roots of it perhaps goes back to Buddhism, but Hinduism absorbed a lot of aspects of ahimsa, and that is still the strength of Hinduism, as I know. Whereas Hinduism glorifies aggressiveness. In fact, they teach the children in their RSS camps that you must hit back 10 times if somebody attacks you. And they tell stories of their leaders who have been known to be aggressive in attacking, showing a way in terms of violence and revenge. Gandhi, of course, was the ultimate of non-violence and civil disobedience. But Modi's camp actually mocks nonviolence. And in fact, one of the members of parliament from his group has erected a statue for the assassin of Gandhi and celebrating his birthday as opposed to Gandhi's birthday, which would have been impossible in the India that I grew up with. And today, this is all happening. His assassin is being celebrated, and Modi has nothing to say about it. Now, Hinduism has always believed in a secular polity where faith is a private matter, but Hindutva is rushing into a Hindu state. Hinduism, despite the fact that the caste system is still very prevalent, caste violence is still being reported every day, Hinduism does provide a model for addressing the caste system, and we've had many leaders who have taught us how to address it, and it's for groups like us in Hinduism to take forward the caste issue. So those are the about 9 points that I tend to talk to people when they ask me, tell me what's the difference. Let's go to the next one. Now, I want to leave with two other slides, I think, which is very important to connect the dots. There have been a lot of articles written in terms of fascism. This particular list of 14 came from Lawrence Britt, which apparently was used to be sold in the Holocaust Museum. So people in India have begun now to take what is happening on the ground and compare it to these 14 signs of fascism. And every one of these can be supported by the news and actions of the government or lack of action of the government in the last few years. And it may shock you, but Hindutva or Modi's government, 12 out of 14 signs of fascism exist today. So I used to be very hesitant a few months ago to use the word fascism, just as the way I was very reluctant to use the word genocide, because these are loaded terms which have a lot of meaning, and we need to be very, very careful in using these terms. But having seen what's happening today in India, I am more and more inclined to use the word Hindutva fascism is what is going on in India today. And I'll leave that with the next slide, with some of the sayings of the original founders of RSS. And these are the founders which you could have found last year being celebrated in Houston by a procession of Hindu nationalists right in the open in the suburbs of Houston. The three leaders that they continue to celebrate and they continue to celebrate even in places like Chicago, Atlanta, and so forth. One of the founders is an RSS chief called Golwalkar, and I have put his quotation on the right-hand top. He was a great admirer of Hitler, and he said that what happened to the Jews showed German pride at the highest has been manifested here. And he says that as a lesson for Hindus. And that is the kind of guy that is being celebrated today by people like Modi and his party. Before that, there was another gentleman called Savarkar who was asked in an interview how independent India would treat Muslims, who used to be called Mohammedans at that time using the British terminology. Oh, of course, as a minority and in the position of your Negroes. And if Mohammedans succeed in seceding and setting up their own country, then what will you do? Well, as in your country, there will be civil war. That is what an RSS founder said before India's independence. And that is what we are all afraid. Progressive Hindus are afraid this particular government is likely to precipitate in India if it continues its pathway. And one last quotation on the left side is one of the other RSS leaders. When he was asked about resort to violence, he said, well, it may appear to involve physical violence, but if it's done in a spirit of detachment and without any selfish motive and hatred, then the act can no longer be termed violent. I'm sure many of the people that are lynching Muslims on the streets of India for mere rumors of beef are probably thinking of their hero who said violence is okay. So these are the three gentlemen that somebody asked me earlier, why does Modi do what he's doing? He's doing what he's doing because he grew up in a culture of RSS where he heard as a youth leader, as a young politician, the sayings of these kinds of leaders, and it's embedded in their mind. Islamophobia and very soon anti-Christian violence, which is already beginning to happen, is going to be very hard to separate from the political Hindutva. So I'll stop there and take any other questions. If I've exceeded my time, my apologies.
Okay, I have a question for you. I've been to India twice on trips with groups, and I really love learning about the different cultures over there. But one of the most disturbing things about India is the dowry system. When a young couple gets married, the bride has to give money to the groom's family, and then they keep coming back for even more money. And if she doesn't come up with more money, they kill her sometimes. That's a horrible thing, and India should get rid of that dowry system.
Yes, I could not agree with you more. But the positive news is the younger, I've heard a lot of younger generation. See, ultimately, if you leave parents out of the marriage system and the bride and groom make their own decision, that is the only way we're going to be able to get rid of the system. Because often the parents are used as a foil to perpetuate the system. So it's been very, very heartening to see younger generation now. Many of them are sending out invitations saying we're not going to have more than 50 people at our wedding, and don't bring presents. People, please contribute to this particular social cause. A lot of that needs to happen, but it is very limited and limited to the urban middle class younger generation. But a lot of what you say are still very prevalent in the rural area, the bride burnings, the bride blackmailing, and it continues to be a major issue under the patriarchal system that we are living under. And it is a human rights issue.
Also, women's rights, yeah.
And a women's rights issue, yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Raju, there's a couple questions in the chat box. The first one is from Louisa. She says, in the US, young people seem to understand and speak regarding the undermining of democracy. Is that apparent globally among younger Hindu people?
Say that again, in terms of awareness of undermining democracy.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Louisa.
Yeah.
This is Louisa. What I was getting at was, I think you touched on it right before that, just how much young people are pushing back against some of these practices that are no longer appropriate. And but more in a political sense, I was just wondering how, like here in the U.S., we're heartened, we're encouraged because our lots of young people are on the streets and protesting and pretty active and vocal. I just was kind of wondering on the political uh, landscape whether or not you were seeing much of that, but it sounds to me like perhaps not so much there.
Uh, yeah, let me answer it two ways. One, when Modi came to power 8 years ago, he had a very wide following even among the young people. And because the young people are on social media and the predominance of the Hindutva language in Facebook and WhatsApp, they have practically run away with the minds of youth because that's the only exposure they get. And yeah, Modi was, after all, elected in a democratic process. So no, he's not a dictator in any sense. So they have been very, very clever in using the media, in using almost a domination of social media to bring the youth to their side. Having said that, the citizenship laws for the first time, which happened just in the last year or so, have changed the scene significantly. That is, youth are, most of the anti-citizenship laws, protests were led by the youth of India. And they are beginning to see through the smoke screen that they were subjected to all these years, because this was an example where they could actually see a fascist government at work, where they were quite ready to get rid of the citizenship of 200 million Muslims in the country. They could see the danger. So things are changing. We are also trying to amplify those voices in our own organization. We are bringing together a roundtable of young people from India and here to have a roundtable discussion. However, some of the younger people in India don't want to appear on video. They probably would want to mask their names, and that tells you something about the environment that they are in right now. But there is some sign of hope of the youth waking up to what is going on the
Yeah.
political side.
Thank you.
Hey, Leslie, can you unmute and ask your question, please? Leslie.
She's muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, all right.
All right, speak.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
All
Leslie.
right. They've had some border clashes with China, India has. And with India's new aggressiveness, is there a real chance of war between China and India because of this new aggressiveness?
It's a great question. I'm not a political analyst, so let me just give you a kind of a street version of what I think is happening. Because of the COVID situation and the distraction of the Indian government with COVID, which many people feel was badly mishandled, and now the government is trying, and that is a serious issue for the Modi government, because if the ordinary people judge that they mishandled the COVID situation, they could very well risk their next election. So they are very, very actively trying to regain their image because of the COVID situation. And because of that distraction, the Chinese seem to have taken the initiative to occupy parts of Ladakh. Ladakh is part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Increasingly so, putting the Modi government in a spot, because they really, right now, India is not ready for a war. So I don't know what's going to happen. You know, we all have a saying that when the chief executive seems to be in trouble, sometimes what is an answer from our own history. I'm not so sure that the country and Modi is ready for it, but there is a lot of ill feeling about China, even among the liberals and progressives, for using this occasion to uh, seek to unilaterally take over parts of Ladakh. So I don't have an answer as to where it is heading, but it is a serious matter.
All right. Are there any more questions, folks?
Yeah, Mohammed, I would like to ask a question. I was wondering about, you mentioned the threat to COVID-19 being a threat to the re-election of the government. Is how's the sense in the country as to protecting democracy? Would the present government be in a position that they could convert to a dictatorship?
Uh, I think the latter, many people fear that the latter is a real possibility under the umbrella of democracy. In fact, some of Modi's fans are already talking about Modi for the next 30 years, just like President Trump talks about, the third term. That's a real possibility, uh, which is why I think the protest movements are led by very experienced activists, Muslim activists, and Hindu activists, and others. And what the government is trying to do to reduce the risk to their future is to focus on arresting these people on trumped up charges so that the youth of the country won't have the leaders that they would need. And that is really what's happening right now. So what it makes it very important for us in this country, while we are doing our own battles here, to understand that the only voice that the current government would be willing to listen is to the voice of the American government. That's been so ever since, from the Carter days to Clinton days, to Obama days, where there may have been wars that these presidents have averted because due to their goodwill with both Pakistan and India, and at one time with China. But even today, it is the lack of action by Trump which has emboldened Modi to do a lot of things that he's doing, because he shares the Islamophobia with this government and feels that he can do anything he wants, and nobody is going to challenge. So that is where we all come in, through our Congress people, through the election that we are going to have, and through the Biden campaign, to raise the awareness that India is not some distant place on the other side of the globe. What we do here affects what is going on in India, and vice versa, because the two democracies cannot afford to be going in the direction of a fascist or in dictatorship rule. So that's what we are focusing on in our advocacy. But it is a tricky one when we are all, rooting for Democratic candidates, but two of them share the same values for India as they share here. But there are other two or three of them that seem to not see that absolute dichotomy in supporting the pluralistic values here while supporting Modi. So what do we do? And this is where the education is coming in, both in Houston and Chicago and one part of California. Now, that may be placing too much emphasis on Indian American origin Congress people. We shouldn't be. But unfortunately, if they get into Congress, some of the other congressional committees are going to look to them to set the tone for their India policy, which probably they shouldn't be doing. I think we have Congress people who are every bit as informed as some of the Indian American Congress people are. So we are now changing our tack, saying, let's not put too much faith in the Congress people or senators of Indian origin. Let us focus on educating as many senators and Congress people who have good feelings about India, who think of India as a friend. And by the way, did you know what is happening now? I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but I had to say that.
I just wanted to thank you for a great presentation. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Raju,
Good
can you
job.
can you take just 1 minute and talk about this conference that you mentioned?
Yeah.
When and where and how do people attend that?
Yes. On October 3rd and 4th, we have a virtual conference that we are organizing under the slogan of Reclaiming India. Reclaiming India is an alliance of Hindu, Muslim, secular, Dalit, and Christian organizations who have come together to raise our voice. And we are doing several panels, both in terms of how to connect with Black Lives Matter and the issue of Islamophobia here, and what's going on in India, what's happening to the judiciary, what's happening to the caste system. And I'll be happy to share the flyer that's coming out. Anybody can join. You can join parts of the conference if you like. It's for 2 hours, 15 minutes on both days. It's a continuation. And we expect Reverend William Barber, Raj Mohan Gandhi, some of the people who are fighting in the courts in India, some of the younger people from Yale who have formed a group to oppose Hindutva in the US. So it'll be really quite a variety of presentations. So please, I'll share that with you all. There will be a link and you can register. And please do share it with the rest of the Amnesty membership. There will be, in fact, the Prisoners of Conscience wall that we are going to inaugurate on that day. We are getting help from the Amnesty people in India, informally. They don't want it to be on the Amnesty logo because of the tremendous pressure they're facing in India. But they're informally going to help us. So we are in a much freer position here to launch that. And we may want to go to individual Congress people. They're adopting prisoners of conscience from Uzbekistan, from Russia, from Syria. And I think it's time that they started to embrace some of the prisoners of conscience who are fighting in India. And you will hear more about it.
Yeah. Okay, so Raju, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I'm going to share your charts with the membership here. And on in his charts in the last 2 pages, there is an email address for contacting him directly, and then there's a website address for the Hindus for Human Rights organization. The website is there, and there's links to any further reading that you may want to do. I'll include all that in my notes when I send it out after the meeting. Okay.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Muhammad,
Thank you.
for organizing this. Thank you all for the attention and the questions. And I'm hoping for a day when we can all say we are not only out of the COVID tunnel, we are out of the threat to democracy tunnel in both our countries.
Here.
Here,
Thank you
here.
very much.
But for you all, the next meeting is on October 5th, same time, and Bob and I are working on getting an outstanding speaker, just like today.
Okay, thank you.
You did a good job today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a
Very
good day.
good. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.